Here we're going to be talking about building an end brace for a multi-strand high tensile electric fence. And the bracing on a multi-strand high tensile fence is probably the single most critical component. Once you start to get 3, 4, 5 wires of high tensile wires on a fence and strain them up, that's putting a lot of force on your corner post and on your end assemblies and any changes of direction in the fence line. It's really important that your braces are built properly and strong, because otherwise the force of the wire straining on the fence is going to pull the corners out of the ground or tip over the change of direction posts. What we've already done to get started here is brought out our posts and our rails. These posts, for corner posts on a high tensile fence, we use 5/6 posts, which means they're 5 to 6 inches in diameter, and they're 8 feet long. That's for a 4-foot tall fence. So we'll leave about 50 inches out of the ground. So we're driving them nearly half of the length of the post into the ground, about 4 feet into the ground and 4 feet out. Our top hot wire is at 48 inches. So they have to be actually about 50 to 52 inches out of the ground. And our rail is going to be 3 inches in diameter and 8 feet long. So your rule of thumb there is that your H-brace assembly needs to be twice as long between the corner post and the brace post as the height of the fence. If you're building a taller fence, you need a longer H-brace assembly. And that's to create the proper geometry so that it doesn't pull up and lever the corner post up out of the ground. I'm going to talk through some of the tools that we use particularly for the bracing on a multi-strand high tensile electric fence. First and foremost, you're going to want your personal protective equipment. So a lot of the steps of this job are noisy, loud, dangerous to your eyes. So some hearing protection. Eye protection is mandatory whenever you're working with high tensile wire. You never know when it's going to spring back, and you definitely don't want it to catch you in your eye. And then gloves if you're working with the wire or you're clearing out the right of way. Of course, if you're using a chainsaw, chaps and safety boots as well. Some of the stuff that we need specifically to build the brace, when we're choosing the post locations, I like to use a wheel measure to get the fence laid out and get our fence spacing properly laid out, and some ground marking paint for spraying upside down is handy for marking those locations as well. And then once you start to drive your posts, you're going to want a level of some sort to make sure your posts are plumb. And I prefer this kind of fence post level, because when you're driving the post in, it's got a level on each side on a 90, so you can plumb it in 2 directions at once without moving the level around. So that just kind of saves you a step there. We like to make a cheat stick or a marker stick. And in this case, because we use insulated line posts for a lot of our fencing, we've just used a cut-off insulated line post to mark those locations so that we're exactly at the right places where the clips go. And you can see more information about these posts in one of our other videos. I've used white tape to mark my ground wire locations and red tape to mark my hot wire locations. But additionally, I've used another color of tape, in this case green, to mark the height of my posts, which is 50 inches on this 4-foot tall fence, as well as my brace pin location. So I like to have my brace pins or my brace rail around 42 inches in between these top 2 hot wires, and I have that marked on my cheat stick for easy reference. That saves me a lot of pulling out the tape measure. You will need a cordless drill with sized to your brace pins. In my case, it's 3/8 inch, and I like to use a spade bit, a nice long spade bit, because the brace pins that I use will fit snugly into a 3/8 hole, and I have that bit marked with a piece of tape here so that I don't drill the hole too deep for my long pin, and you'll see the details of that in just a minute. My long brace pins are around 9 inches. My short ones are between 3 and 4 inches, and I make these out of, in my case, old bent wheel line spokes are the perfect size, but you can make them out of small rebar or other types of rod. You will need, of course, your typical fencing tools, pair of fencing pliers is helpful. Electric fencing high tensile pliers. These are parallel jaw pliers, pretty handy, and a decent framing hammer is nice. And of course a carpenter's pencil or a Sharpie to mark your line heights and your pin locations and all of that. As well, you'll need something to cut off your rail to the right length. You can use a Sawzall with a pruning blade or a wood blade. I just started using this little mini chainsaw. Is pretty handy, or of course you can use a regular chainsaw as well. The electric stuff nowadays is pretty nice because it's instant on, instant off. You also will need a handful of staples. 2-inch staples are good, and I like to use, to keep my twitch wire or my brace wire away from the electric fence wires, I like to use a couple of joint clamps to hold those wires together, and I'll show you that later on. You also want to have some sort of bucket to keep all your wire scraps or broken staples in, so that you're not leaving hardware behind that could be a hazard to the livestock. In this case, we're also using a Hayes chain strainer to pull our guide wire, and as well we use that to tension up all of our other wires as we put them in. It's a super helpful, handy tool. We handle our high tensile wire. It's 12.5 gauge galvanized, class 3 galvanized, 160 psi high tensile steel wire, and we get it on wooden spools and handle it on a payout spinner. We also have a hitch mounted payout spinner that we use. You could also be getting loose coils and handle them on a spinning jenny. Either way, you're going to need this down by your corner post in order to pull your brace wire. And I think that's about it for the tools that we need for now. Let's get into it. So after we got in our corner posts, stretched our guide wire, then we used our rail, our 8-foot rail, to determine the location of our brace post. So just put the brace rail up on the inside of the corner post, lay it out on the ground, and then mark the end of the rail with ground marking spray paint, and that's going to choose your location where the guide wire and where the guide wire crosses the end of the brace rail. And you can't have the gap between these posts be too long. If the brace rail won't reach, if it's too short, then it's not going to work. So it's better to have the brace post a little closer and cut off the end of the rail than to have it be too far apart. I'm going to go ahead and get this guide wire out of the way so that we can build our brace. Okay, we hold our rail in place with 2 3/8 inch diameter pins, and there's a short pin about 4 inches long that goes into the corner post, and it'll be about halfway into the corner post and halfway into the rail, completely hidden inside of the post and rail. The longer pin goes on the brace post side, and we actually drill and drive it through from the outside and leave it sticking out about 1 inch so that we can run our brace wire over top of it. So first step here is going to be to choose our brace location, and like I said, I do it at about 42 inches. I'm going to put this down on the ground so that I know my wire height locations. I'm going to have my top hot wire on this fence is going to be right about here. So I'm going to put my brace pin around 42 inches. And it's not imperative that the pins are at exactly 42 inches on both posts, but it's nice if the rail is level or if it looks level from where you're generally looking at it. So it needs to be relatively flat. The exact height doesn't exactly matter, but about, at least 2/3 of the way up the height of the post. Once we've got that marked, I'm going to come over here with my 3/8 inch spade bit, and I'm going to center it on the post at my mark, and I'm going to drill in about half the depth of the pin. So in this case, it's around 2 inches that I'm going in for this hole, and the pin can just be popped right in there. I'm going to drill a corresponding hole right in the center of my rail. And it's okay if this one's a little deeper than the pin. You just want to make sure that there's plenty of space for the pin to fit into. That should be enough. So, kind of using my finger to locate that hole, and then I'm going to slide it onto the pin until it's flush against the corner post. And I don't do any sort of notching or shaping here or anything. It seems to me like it's going to be just as effective if the flat end is pushing against the round post. In this case, there's a little bit of slope here. This post is a little bit lower, so we might end up with the rail a little above 42, but I'm going to roughly get where I want my wire spacing, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that 42 inches on the post there. And then I'm going to put my level on the rail and just kind of hold it beside the brace post to just get a rough idea. So I'm going to be a little bit below level here, but judging by the difference in the elevation between these two things, I'm actually going to put the brace higher here, and I'm just going to make sure that it's not interfering with my highest hot wire. You want to make sure that your marker stick is not down in the hole or up on a rock. You kind of want to be on the flat ground surface. And I think I'm going to go ahead and put it right about there. So I'm going to mark the location on the outside of the post, even with the center of the brace rail. And then I'm going to use whatever sawzall, or whatever you choose to cut the rail off so that it's just a little bit longer than the post, and that'll help make sure that it's a snug fit. So I'm going to put it down at about the height where I want to pin it. I'm going to mark it a little bit long. Okay, and then I'm going to put it up here and finish the cut. All right, now that we've got the end cut off, we're going to fit the rail into position and knock it down so it's straight in line with our mark that we made earlier. And that's a good time to just step back and double check it and make sure your rail looks nice, especially from your house or wherever you're looking at it for the next 30 years. I'm happy with it there. So what I'm going to do is get my it's funny how I got to do that. So what I'm going to do is get my spade bit on my cordless driver here, and I'm going to make sure that it's in line with my mark and that I'm keeping the bit relatively level and square, so that I'm going to try to drive it straight into the center of the rail. And I'm going to drill in all the way down to my mark so that once I drive my pin in, I'll leave my pin just proud, so there's, a 1/2 inch or an inch or so of the pin sticking out of the end of the post. That should be enough. Then I'm going to take my 9-inch pin, place it into the hole, and then I'll drive it in until there's just a little bit, say 3/4 of an inch, still left poking out of this brace post. Once we've got the pin in with, say, 1/2 inch to an inch poking out of the brace post, we're going to just go ahead and drop a 2-inch staple over top of there and tap it a little bit to keep it in position. And that's just going to allow our brace wire to run smoothly over this post without digging into the wood, so we can pull it. Next step is going to be to drive a staple to hold your brace wire at the bottom of the corner post. So remember, the brace wire is always going to go from the bottom of the corner post up to the top of the brace post. So you can drive that staple in horizontally right down near the ground on your corner post. And you're going to want to leave at least 1/2 inch of the staple outside of the wood. And then once you've got it in, just give it a couple taps so it's at a slight downward angle, and take one more staple and drop it right over top of the one you just drove in. And again, that's going to just allow the brace wires to slide smoothly over instead of digging into the wood. Now we're ready to pull our brace wire, and we're just using our same 12.5 gauge high tensile for this. There's a few different ways to do these, and a lot of people go around the brace posts and the end post in a figure 8. I've decided that's not necessary really, and I just go around in a double loop. And then I'll show you some extra tricks that I do to keep it away from the electric wires on the fence. So we're gonna start with our payout spinner down near the corner post, and we're gonna pull out our wire going up and around the staple we put on the end pin. And then we're gonna go back down around the corner post again. And you can slide it around the staple at the bottom, or you can just go around and move it down afterward, whatever's easier. Sort of the most frustrating part of building a brace. Sometimes it can help to pull the other wire in the correct direction. And I want to end up back around the middle here. So with your high tensile, when you've got a piece that you want to stay in place, you can bend a 90 into it and then stick it into the ground like a stake, and that'll hold right there where you need it. So now I'm just going to pull some more off of this spool just to get myself back out to the center where I'm going to connect the two wires. Okay, make sure you have enough to fully overlap. And then I'm going to cut that wire with my high tensile cutters. And you can see I've got my foot on my bitter end, and then my standing end I'm holding with my hand. And if you're not holding this, it's going to fly off and fly all over the place. So I'm going to cut this. So I'm just going to bend it and stick it in the ground here so it doesn't fly away. Bend a 90 into it and stick it right into the ground. And then I'm going to go back and put the end of this wire away back on the payout spinner. And pulling these brace wires or getting off a little wire for tying insulators is a lot easier if you're using a spool that's not completely full. So it's helpful if you can pull out a couple lengths of your fence wire first. When it comes to attaching the ends of this brace wire, you've got a few different options. The traditional method was to tie them together and then put a twitch, which is a stick or a piece of metal bar or rod, in between and just twist it, and that'll tension it up naturally. If you're going to use that on an electric fence, I'd recommend using a wood twitch and not a steel one, which is just another opportunity for it to short out. A couple of other options you can use. You can use a gripple and insert both wires into the gripple, and then use a gripple tensioning tool to tighten it up. I've done that on a lot of braces over the years. The gripple is a mechanical device, and the little gripper cams inside can loosen off over time, but you can also tighten back up the fence if you're using a gripple, and they're removable. So that's a pretty good option. Nowadays, I tend to use a ratchet strainer. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate here. I'm going to go ahead and tie this onto one of those wires and then slide the other wire through the hole in the ratchet strainer and use that to tension up the brace. Take one of your wires and pass it through the end of the ratchet strainer, and you want this whatever tensioning device you're using to be somewhere around the middle of the brace. I'm going to put a bend in the wire, and then I'm going to put a crank handle into it so I can tie my knot here, and I'm just going to cross it over itself and pull it around the wire to make about 5 tight loops. So there's 1, 2, I'm keeping those loops nice and tight and close together, 4, 5. And then to break that extra off, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees like in all my knots, and then crank it over one time, and it's going to break off nice and smooth there. And there's more information about that in the knot tying video. Make sure your scrap gets into your scrap bucket so it doesn't get left behind. With the other wire, you're going to go ahead and run it through one of the holes in the ratchet drum and pull it right through, and just get it snug and put a bit of a bend in it so it stays in position. Now, before you tension it right up is a good time to check and just make sure your wires are running smoothly. It's nice if they don't cross over where they run along the post. So I'm just kind of making sure that the top wire stays on top, the bottom wire stays on the bottom. and that they're in a good position and over top of our staples for when we tighten it. Another step before we tension the brace wire right up that I've learned to do, it's important to keep the brace wire away from your hot wires on your electric fence. If the brace wire is touching the hot wires, and is down in the plants or on the ground, it's shorting out. If it touches a hot wire and a ground wire, well, it's highly conductive and you've got a dead short. I've tried a few different things to insulate them and keep the wires apart over the years, but the best thing I've found is to use a couple of joint clamps. I like to use the kind with a wing nut because they're just easy to get on and use. And so all I do is loosen that off until the wing nut's just barely on, and then I'm going to get all 4 wires, again, nice and tidy, inside of the joint clamp, rotate the L around so it's between the legs of the clamp, and then just tighten it down loosely. You don't want to get it too tight because what we're going to do next is slide it right down toward the corner, and you can see how that draws all of these wires together, and that'll keep them plenty far away from the hot wires on the fence without trying to use any insulator or spacing them out or covering up the hot wires. And all those other solutions over time for me have tended to slip out or fall apart. The way these joint clamps are designed, there's the L-shaped bolt, the nut, and then there's a short leg and a long leg. And they're designed so that when the nut is engaged on the threads, you can rotate the L around the short leg, and so you don't have to take the nut all the way off. That makes it a lot easier to get it over multiple wires. That's how they're designed with that short side there. So I've got the nut on, I'm going to rotate the L down, and I'm just going to put the 2 legs over top of these wires, keep everything nice and tidy, and then rotate that L up between the legs and just tighten it down just until the short leg is past the 90. And then you can easily slide it up to keep these wires out of the way. We'll leave it a little bit loose for now so that we can still tighten up our ratchet strainer. So using a ratchet strainer handle, we're going to come onto the ratchet strainer and engage this on the hub, and then just start rotating the ratchet so that it engages with the spring. And we're going to do that a few times until it's nice and snug. And it'll tighten up even a little bit more when we slide those joint clamps down, but we still want to get it nice and tight to make a strong brace. Okay, I'm going to go a couple more clicks. That's really snugging up. It's taken all the tension out of the line, and I think right there is going to be just about right. Now we're ready to move these joint clamps up closer to the end so that they pull this brace wire out of the way. So you can use a claw hammer, put it over and just pull it right up. And if you're having trouble, you can also put your fencing pliers on one side of it and use that to drive it up further, just until it pulls the wire tight to the middle and it's out of the way of your electric wires. We do the same thing on the bottom. I'm just gripping the fencing pliers loosely so they're not pinching the wire. Drive it down. And now you can see the whole brace wire is right in the middle, and it's going to be out of the way of our fence wires no matter which side of the post they're on. So there you have it. We've completed our H-brace for our end assembly on this multi-wire high tensile electric fence. The way that this brace works, you can see it all now that it's come together. Your brace rail is at least 2/3 of the way up these posts, and the length of it is twice the height of your fence. And then your brace wire runs from the bottom corner of your corner post up to the top of your brace post. So as your wires are tied onto this corner post and pulling down that way toward the other side of the fence, it's trying to pull this post and lever it over in the ground this way. But the brace wire is pulling the top of the brace post, and that's pushing the brace rail back into the corner post. So that's how the assembly together, working as a whole, prevents the corner post from pulling out or tipping over in the ground. And this is an assembly that should last a good long while. The ratchet strainer can be retensioned should these wires slacken off, or if you have your top rail break or rot and you need to replace it, you can loosen off the strainer wire, take a chainsaw through the rail, and then just install another rail and tension it all back up. So there's your H-brace assembly that's gonna make for a strong and long-lasting high tensile electric fence. The important last step, you gotta lean on it and say, yeah, that's it, that's not going anywhere. Yeah, that's in there. If you don't do that, something bad might happen. You gotta really prove it. Yeah, that's not going anywhere.